Food is the most basic human need, yet under slavery, even this was twisted into a tool of control. On the plantations of the American South, the struggle over nourishment defined daily life. Children weakened, families endured emptiness, and adults pushed through exhausting work on diets that left them vulnerable. And yet, even in this nightmare, enslaved people resisted and came up with many ways to survive. This is the story of slaves' foods on plantations, how hunger was used as a weapon, how survival was wrestled from the soil, and how, even in bondage, people carried forward a culinary legacy that endures in America today. Before we continue, consider subscribing and supporting our work. It helps us bring more hidden histories like this to light and share them with the world. Now let's begin our journey into the harsh realities of food under slavery. Enslavers understood the power of the stomach. They knew a hungry person could not fight, could not run, could not dream of freedom. So they crafted rations not to nourish, but to control. The daily allotment given to an enslaved person was carefully measured to keep them alive, but never fully fed. Former slave and abolitionist Frederick Douglass described how the daily allowance was deliberately meager. He recalled being fed coarse cornmeal that had been boiled into mush, poured into a trough, and set on the ground. When the food was placed down, enslaved children were called to it as if they were livestock, and they scrambled forward like pigs to devour it. Some scooped with oyster shells, others with broken shingles, and many with their bare hands. Few were left satisfied. For the children, this humiliating ritual was both an early reminder of their dehumanization and a sentence to lifelong malnutrition. Many did not survive their early years. Their small bodies weakened until death came from hunger or disease. Douglass also remembered being haunted by hunger as a child in other ways. He was forced to scavenge for crusts of bread, scraps of fat from the cooking pot, or water that had been used to boil meat. These stolen morsels offered brief relief, but never filled his stomach. Sometimes he even fought with the household dog for crumbs that fell from the table. Hunger followed him like a shadow, shaping his earliest memories of life in bondage. Harriet Jacobs, who endured slavery before escaping and becoming a writer and abolitionist, also recorded these cruelties in her autobiography, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. She recounted how enslaved men and women often risked everything for scraps. One man, desperate with hunger, stole a pig. When caught, he was whipped with a lash until his back was torn open, beaten so savagely that by the end of the punishment, he collapsed from loss of blood, believing he was dying. Jacobs also described another case where an enslaved man was chained simply for taking a piece of salt pork or a handful of corn. The punishment was to be confined without food until his body wasted away. Even something as small as a peck of corn, she explained, could condemn a person to imprisonment, starvation, and slow physical ruin. In addition, overseers sometimes handed out rations that were spoiled, rotten, or crawling with insects, which often led to sickness spreading in the quarters. The elderly, considered less useful for field work, were often given almost nothing, left to waste away until death claimed them. The pattern is unmistakable. Hunger became a deliberate cruelty, wielded as a weapon to weaken bodies, crush spirits, and ensure obedience. Yet even in that darkness, flickers of defiance and hope took root. Long before emancipation, the enslaved drew on their deep knowledge of agriculture to feed themselves. Some arrived in America, carrying not just memories, but physical links to their homeland. During the Middle Passage, a few managed to hide seeds of African crops in their hair, clothing, or personal belongings. Others brought the knowledge of how to cultivate plants that were already transported across the Atlantic by traders. Rice, okra, collard greens, beans, sorghum, watermelon, and black-eyed peas all took root in American soil, forming a hidden lifeline of survival on plantations. After grueling days in the fields, men and women from regions such as Ghana and Senegal tended small garden plots at night or in the early morning. Their bodies were already broken from labor, yet they carved out extra hours to plant, weed, and harvest. These hidden patches, tucked behind cabins, along fences, or near ditches, became essential sources of food and survival. They were often no larger than a few yards, but they meant the difference between children going hungry or having something nourishing in their stomachs. In the low country of Georgia and South Carolina, the expertise of West African farmers proved indispensable. Their knowledge of irrigation, soil care, and seed selection made rice cultivation possible in the marshy coastal plains. Planters profited enormously from this expertise, but it was the enslaved themselves who preserved the traditions. The Gullah and Geechee communities in particular became the keepers of these practices, maintaining rice fields and building a cuisine that blended African, Native American, and European elements. Their tables featured rice dishes mixed with beans or greens, seafood stews that drew from the coast, wild greens gathered from the woods, and preserved meats cured in barrels, foods that both sustained life and carried memory. Among the most important crops in these provision gardens were collard greens. Bitter, hardy, and rich in nutrients, they could withstand poor soil and colder seasons, making them reliable even under harsh conditions. In many West African cuisines, leafy greens had long been central to the diet, and enslaved families continued that tradition in America. They cooked collards slowly over open fires, stewing them with bits of pork fat or bones discarded by the enslaver. These long-cooked pots of greens fed large families, and the broth, sometimes called pot liquor, was prized for its nutrients. To enslaved parents, collards were more than food. They were a shield against malnutrition in children who might otherwise waste away under meager rations. Okra was another vital transplant. Its seeds, carried across the Atlantic, adapted quickly to southern soil and thrived in the humid climate. For generations, West African cooks had used okra to thicken soups and stews, and in America this tradition blossomed into the creation of gumbo. In plantation kitchens, enslaved women combined okra with seafood, rice, and spices to craft a dish that filled stomachs and kept cultural memory alive. Gumbo later became a celebrated hallmark of Southern cuisine, but its origins lay in the small gardens and cooking fires of enslaved Africans. Okra was also eaten fried, boiled, or mixed into cornmeal cakes, each preparation a reminder that despite captivity, enslaved people could still craft their own sustenance. Corn, peanuts, and black-eyed peas were also staples. These crops grew reliably and could be stored for long periods, giving enslaved families food security when rations ran thin. Corn in particular was ground into meal for bread or porridge, while peanuts and peas added protein to diets that otherwise lacked meat. Tending these gardens was exhausting, as it often had to be done after dusk when field work was over. But the harvest meant children might have something to eat beyond spoiled salt pork and moldy cornmeal. With rations meager and often spoiled, enslaved cooks turned hardship into invention. From scraps and cast-offs, they built a cuisine, blending African foodways with the harsh realities of American slavery. Out of this struggle came soul food, a food tradition born from resilience, memory, and the refusal to let culture die. One of the most defining staples of this cuisine was the ash cake, a simple but filling bread made from cornmeal. Dough was wrapped in leaves, buried under hot ashes, and baked until dense enough to carry into the fields. For countless men, women, and children, this was breakfast and lunch, eaten quickly while laboring in the fields. A related staple was the hoe cake, a cornmeal batter cooked on a griddle, or the flat blade of a hoe. Both breads were plain, but they were portable, durable, and essential to survival. Meat was rare, so every scrap was made to count. Salt pork, hog jowl, and ham hocks, parts of the animal white households often discarded, were simmered with beans, turnip greens, or collards to create stews that stretched far enough to feed many mouths. The liquid from these pots, rich with nutrients and flavor, became known as pot liquor and was soaked up with cornbread or cornmeal cakes called corn dodgers. Even small amounts of fat skimmed from the master's table were poured over rice or boiled cornmeal to make otherwise bland rations more palatable. At this point, some of you may be wondering how the enslaved managed to cook at all, how they endured with so little, under such constant watch, and still kept their traditions alive long enough to pass them down. The answer is both heartbreaking and extraordinary. Cooking for the enslaved began first in the quarters. Masters rarely provided enough food, and when they did, it was often spoiled or meager. Families survived by pooling whatever they could gather. cornmeal from rations, scraps of pork or fish, vegetables from hidden gardens, and herbs or nuts foraged from the woods. The cooking tools they used during these gatherings were often second-hand or discarded tools and cookware taken from plantation kitchens, occasionally bartered for with extra labor or mended from broken pieces the enslaved were allowed to salvage. Some families also fashioned makeshift kettles from ironware repaired by blacksmiths on the plantation. Usually around a single pot, each family contributed a handful of beans, greens, or bits of cornmeal. Out of these contributions came hearty stews, thick enough to stretch across many mouths. These communal meals echoed West African traditions, where cooking and eating were shared acts that bound communities together. Preservation was another key. When fresh food was scarce, enslaved cooks dried okra, strung beans, salted fish, and pickled vegetables to last through the winter months. These techniques, carried from Africa, gave enslaved families a measure of security against hunger. Corn husks became wrappers for steaming ash cakes, salt brine was used to cure meat, and fires were kept burning long into the night to keep food edible for the next day's labor. Through these methods, African foodways survived, reshaped by the harsh demands of plantation life. On the sea islands of Georgia and South Carolina, the Gullah people, descendants of West African rice farmers, preserved this continuity most clearly. Their knowledge of rice cultivation, carried across the Atlantic in their memories and techniques, allowed them to shape both the economy of the region and the food traditions that survived within it. In their kitchens and quarters, they turned necessity into culture. Their low country boil-ups combined rice, okra, beans, pork, and greens into one-pot meals that could sustain entire families or even multiple households. These dishes were slow-cooked and layered with flavor, thick and hearty enough to keep laborers moving through long days in the fields. Because of their culinary talents and resourcefulness, enslaved people also often commanded the kitchens of the big house. Here, their skills were pushed to the limits. Plantation owners prided themselves on offering guests meals that rivaled the elegance of Paris or London, and it was enslaved cooks who bore the burden of delivering that illusion of refinement. They endured blistering heat radiating from open hearths, heavy iron pots that had to be hoisted and shifted by hand, and smoke so dense it stung the eyes and lungs. Yet in these punishing conditions, they mastered delicate sauces, roasted meats, candied fruits, elaborate puddings, and breads baked without the steady control of a modern oven. The task was relentless. With no reliable utensils, precise measurements, or consistent ingredients, enslaved chefs adapted constantly, substituting when supplies ran low or adjusting when food spoiled in the humid climate. The margin for error was almost non-existent. A roast left too long, a sauce that separated, or bread that failed to rise could result in humiliation or harsh punishment. Despite this, they became innovators, turning scraps into delicacies, improvising techniques, and building a distinctly American cuisine rooted in African knowledge, yet demanded for European-style dining. Their labor was invisible by design. The guests praised the enslavers' hospitality, while the true artisans, the cooks whose names were rarely spoken outside the kitchen, remained unacknowledged. Their brilliance not only sustained the plantation household, but also laid the foundation for much of what the world now celebrates as Southern cuisine. One of the most famous was Hercules Posey, George Washington's enslaved chef. In Philadelphia, where Washington maintained the presidential household, Hercules orchestrated grand banquets that showcased the nation's first president as a man of refinement and power. He commanded a bustling kitchen, directing assistants and enslaved scullery workers while producing elaborate multi-course meals that included roasted meats, fine pastries, custards, and delicately spiced sauces. His reputation spread quickly among Washington's political and foreign guests. They marveled at the elegance of the dining table, praising the president for his taste and sophistication, never realizing that the true genius belonged to Hercules. His artistry, however, was bound in chains. Though admired for his skills, Hercules was still enslaved, and the recognition he earned never translated into freedom or independence. Other enslaved pastry cooks and bakers displayed similar mastery. With little more than instinct and makeshift tools, they created cakes, pies and puddings, tending brick ovens that required constant care. A successful cake could depend on the way coals were raked across the hearth or on molds hammered out of tin by hand. Breads rose with homegrown yeast cultures, maintained in conditions far removed from professional kitchens. Each dish was a triumph over scarcity and oppression. Enslaved cooks applied their knowledge in the quarters, turning scraps and rations into meals that kept families alive. Cooking became a way to resist hunger, to preserve culture, and to care for their children under impossible circumstances. Out of meager portions and hidden gardens, they sustained both body and spirit, proving that even in bondage, culture could not be extinguished. After emancipation, those foodways did not vanish. They endured, adapted, and grew. Formerly enslaved women such as Melinda Russell, who had cooked in Tennessee before fleeing to Michigan, preserved their culinary knowledge in some of the first African-American cookbooks ever published. Her 1866 work recorded recipes that carried the memory of slavery's kitchens, while pointing toward new possibilities in freedom. In the decades that followed, these flavors spilled into Black-owned community kitchens, church gatherings, and eventually restaurants. Establishments serving ribs, catfish, gumbo, fried chicken, and red rice became gathering spots where families built community and shared their heritage at the table. By the early 20th century, these foods had become powerful symbols of Black identity. They anchored Sunday dinners, holiday feasts, and celebrations, reminding families of their resilience across generations. During the Civil Rights era, soul food restaurants turned into sanctuaries. Activists met over collard greens and cornbread, finding both nourishment and solidarity. Meals provided strength for marches, meetings, and organizing, transforming food from a weapon once used to enforce hunger into a tool of unity and cultural pride. The humble ash cake that once kept field workers alive had by then become part of a proud culinary tradition, honored at Southern tables and carried far beyond by migration. Soul food stood as living proof that oppression could not erase memory, nor extinguish the human capacity to create meaning out of struggle. As the 20th century progressed, African-American cuisine entered the mainstream of American food culture. Recipes like macaroni and cheese, dirty rice, collard greens, and sweet potato pie moved from oral tradition into cookbooks and national magazines, celebrated as part of the nation's identity. What had once been food of survival was recognized as a cuisine of skill, creativity, and resilience. Yet this legacy carried contradictions. The foods that once sustained enslaved families were heavy and filling, designed for those forced into brutal labor from sunup to sundown. Generations later, as lifestyles shifted and most people no longer burned thousands of calories through constant physical work, those same staples began to have different effects. What once fueled survival in the fields now contributed to health problems in a more sedentary world. Scholars in medicine and public health have noted how the Southern diet, rich in fried foods, salted pork, fats, and sugar, has been linked to higher rates of hypertension, diabetes, and heart disease among Black Americans. It's ironic how the recipes that preserved life in the harshest conditions now risk shortening lives in an age when the body no longer demands the same relentless fuel. This tension has sparked a new movement among chefs and home cooks who want to keep soul food alive while also making it healthier for today's lifestyles. In kitchens across the country, people are reimagining familiar dishes without losing their roots. Fried chicken might be baked or air-fried. Collard greens are often cooked with smoked turkey instead of salt pork, and cornbread gets lightened with less sugar and fat. More vegetables and legumes are being added to the table. Black-eyed peas, okra, kale, lentils, showing that soul food can be just as vibrant with fresh and lighter ingredients. In some cities, vegan and vegetarian soul food restaurants have grown in popularity, proving that this tradition can thrive in new forms while still carrying its original spirit. The purpose is not to erase the old ways, but to adapt them. Soul food has always been about making the best out of what was available. Where enslaved families once turned scraps and rations into something nourishing, today's cooks are finding new methods that meet modern health needs while still honoring the flavors passed down through generations. That creativity is part of the tradition itself. Through these changes, the chain of memory remains unbroken. Every pot of beans, every skillet of cornbread, every plate of greens holds more than taste. It carries history. The story stretches back to the rice fields of West Africa, through the plantations of the American South, and forward into city kitchens and restaurants today. Even as recipes evolve, they continue to connect people to the resilience and imagination of those who came before. The voices of the enslaved remind us of the stakes behind this history. Harriet Jacobs once reflected that she would rather see her children poor and half-starved in freedom than pampered in slavery. Her words reveal a truth that no dish, no matter how fine, could disguise. The food given under bondage was never nourishment in the full sense. It could fill the stomach, but it could not remove the bitterness of captivity. For the enslaved, food was never about indulgence. It was about dignity, about family, and about the will to endure. By turning scraps and rations into sustaining meals, they seized a measure of control that slavery sought to deny them. The history of plantation food is therefore one of both pain and power. Hunger was deliberately used as a weapon, yet it was resisted through skill, memory, and tradition. Every pot of greens, every bowl of beans and rice, every pie made from sweet potatoes still carries the imprint of that endurance. What is known today as soul food is more than comfort cooking. It is a living record of survival and creativity, proof that even under the harshest oppression, African Americans carved out something nourishing for both body and spirit. The kitchens of the past may have crumbled, but their fire continues to burn in the dishes we prepare today, keeping alive the resilience of those who came before. That brings us to the end of this powerful journey. If you found value in exploring this history, make sure to give this video a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Leave a comment with your thoughts. We'd love to hear how this history resonates with you. And if you believe more people should know these stories, share this video far and wide. Thank you for watching. Until next time, remember, the past is never silent. It calls on us to listen, to learn, and to keep its truth alive.